Welcome to Days of Noah, Part 3. Were they capable of amalgamating animals? And we're basically going to look at some historical events. Obviously, we won't have anything that precedes the flood, only those things that come after the flood. But the goal is to look at if the people of old were that intelligent, then how smart must the people of nowadays surpass the people that came after the flood? So, were the people of nowadays capable of manipulating animal genes? Today's study was to determine if they were smarter than how modern scientists depicts ancient men. While it is true that men dressed simply in the days of old, this simplicity of dress does not reflect on their intelligent level. So what we're going to do, we're going to study ancient Egyptian history, and we're going to learn a lot of things that the Egyptians learned, and hopefully in the near future we'll probably look at a probability as to where the Egyptians got all of their information from. I have a good idea where to start from, but to sit down and actually formulate this study is going to take some time. But we're going to look at ancient Egyptians, and we're going to learn that these people were doing stuff that we are just discovering today. I mean, when I say today, within the past 10, 15 years, and it's like 2023 that this study is going up. But before we get into our study, to find out if Adam and Eve were smarter than we are today by looking at the ancient Egyptians after the flood, we will be looking into that. But before we start, let's start off in prayer. Our Father, we give you thanks and praise for allowing us to study your word so that we may understand that Adam was created in your image and your likeness. And we have been depicting Adam and people of his day as mindless cavemen, men who barely could speak, who could barely troubleshoot and handle everything with violence. But as we will see, that the Egyptians' technology is equivalent to some of the things that we are creating today. And if they were that advanced 2,000 or 4,000 years ago, we can only imagine how Adam and Eve were and their children, seeing that they come directly from Christ's hand. We thank you for blessing us with your presence as we study your word with us. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. Our first reading is coming from Bible Commentary Volume 1, and this is on Genesis chapter 6, and the page is 1089, paragraph 9. Men before the flood lived many hundreds of years, and when 100 years old, they were considered but youths. Those long-lived men had sound minds in sound bodies. Their mental and physical strength was so great that the present feeble generation can bear no comparison to them. So this author is letting us know that what we consider to be cavemen far exceeds our level of intelligence. Now you may wonder, why would the scientists want to keep up this notion that the people of Adam's day and Noah's day were mindless barbarians or ignorant cavemen? And the reason for that is to substantiate, what's that word they use? Evolution. See, one of the theory of evolution is that men become better and better. But if we follow what this author is saying, we will understand that men were better, and then as sin crept in, we started degrading. And the reason why I say men were better, because when God had created Adam and Eve in the beginning, he said, behold, everything that he created was good. Sin hadn't touched them. Even though the tempter was in the garden, they were not affected by sin. But after sin came into the world, then we went from 900 years down to about 800 years, and then down to 600 years during the times of Noah. Then it dropped down to about 300 years, and then we get round to about Abraham, Isaac time, and men's lifespan has dropped down to about 150, 100, 200 max, maybe. So, continuing on, those ancients had nearly 1,000 years in which to acquire knowledge. And when you look at it, look at people like Elon Musk and who else? Nikola Tesla. These men lived for less than 200 years, and look at all the things that they were able to accomplish. Now, can you imagine what living almost 1,000 years, what those people were capable of accomplishing? And remember, these people were nearer to God as it relates to creation than we are. So they were far superior in intelligence. And the fact that they lived so long gave them even more time to accomplish a whole lot of things that we can only dream of. Now the question may come up, well, if that's the case, how come we don't see these technology today? And the reason we don't see it is because the flood. The whole purpose behind the flood was to destroy that race and also all of the things that they were coming up with. When you read in Genesis chapter 6, it talks about how every imagination of these people were evil only continually. So God wanted to wipe away that, as he also did with Sodom and Gomorrah. As a result of their evil action, God rained down fire, and the only evidence we have that Sodom and Gomorrah exists is the Bible reading. And then when you go to the area of where Sodom and Gomorrah is, you'll notice that the ground is salty. You can't grow anything there. All of these showing that when God decides to blot out sin, he utterly obliterates it. And that is what happened during the flood. But continuing on, and before I go on, I'll say this. There is still evidence of an ancient race. When you look at the area between North Andros and Bimini, there's a road under the water. Now, people claim that this road was made by Atlantis. I don't really care. My point is there is evidence of an ancient civilization. When you go to Japan, there are monuments that are like anywhere between 5 meters below sea level to about, I think, 60 meters or 60 feet. I can't remember. But I should probably look into presenting that to show you or proof that there is an ancient civilization. So that means we probably will have like 2 or 3 more studies of this thing. But anyway, continuing on. They came upon the stage of action from the ages of 60 to 100 years. About the time those who now live the longest have acted their part in their little short lifetime and have passed off the stage. Those are deceived and flattered on the delusion that the present is an age of real progress and that the human race has been in ages past progressing in true knowledge are under the influence of the father of lies, whose work has ever been to turn the truth of God into a lie. So the reason evolution make these men out to be stupid, ignorant, is because this is the father of lies working. This is Satan trying to make it seem as if, people who would have been created by God's hand are ignorant buffoons. So the science book depicting the first men on the earth make them appear as brainless, not having any real language, as we said earlier, barbarians and cavemen. This is a wrong view to have. We have degenerated from Adam. It is now that we are trying to catch up to their level of progress. How do we know these men were not Neanderthals? In Genesis chapter 1 verse 26, it says, "And God said, let us make man in our image after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them. To be made in God's image and likeness is to have similar appearance and character of God. We know they dress simple because after sin, God gave them animal skin for clothing. It is possible they didn't modify this form of dress much. Up to the days of Jesus, you saw remnants of the ancient style of dress. We saw it with Elijah and also John the Baptist, who wear simple garments. We also know God is all-knowing. While I believe God didn't impart to man all his wisdom, I believe he gave them a lot of information. Because the people of Noah's day were so close to the original creation, their cognitive abilities and memory had to be next level. We talked about them having high level of wisdom because God is all-knowing. We also know God has perfect memory. To be made in his likeness would have given the ancient people photographic memory. And this is why you don't see any writings until you get to about the days of Moses. Because we don't have any writing of Abraham. We don't have any writing of people before Abraham. Now we have writings of the ancient Egyptians, and scientists are now starting to find evidence of Joseph. And I truly believe that between Abraham and Joseph is where the ancient Egyptians get their high level of understanding. But that's another study for another day. To believe that Adam was a mindless caveman is an insult to God. If Adam was a mindless person, then God must be looked at as a mindless person or being, because Adam, according to God, was made in his likeness. As stated earlier, I do not believe Adam had all of God's wisdom, but he must have had more than we can imagine today. Let us examine history to show the ancient people, though simple in dress, were not ape-like men. My first reading is coming from the Siberian Times, and it is dealing with scientists to recreate 2,300-year-old brain surgery after finding evidence of successful operation. So according to the Siberian Times, men were performing brain surgery 2,300 years ago. Let us read. Neurosurgeons are working with anthropologists and archaeologists to recreate the surgical techniques of our ancient ancestors. This follows the discovery of two ancient skulls showing clear evidence of recovery after trepanation some 2,300 years to 2,500 years ago in the Altai Mountains. One man aged 40 to 45 have had evidently suffered a trauma. The academics surmise he was hit, suffering damage to his left temporal and parietal bones. As a result, he developed a hematoma, which would have led to him suffering headaches, nausea, vomiting, disturbances to his consciousness, and movement problems in his right leg and hand. The ancient doctors decided on a trepanation to remove the hematoma. Evidence of later bone growth seen in the skull suggests that the man not only survived the surgery, but lived for years afterwards. Does this look like the ancient people were nothing more than cavemen? The second male skull had no visible trace of trauma, but instead it is suspected he had a congenital deformation of the skull which the surgeon wanted to ameliorate. In both these cases, a relatively small hole was made in the skull in a place where safety was maximized, avoiding damage to the joints and the dura mater. In the first case, the Scythian surgeon made a hole more than 1 centimeter behind the cranial suture and an appropriate distance from the edge of the sagittal sinus. Interestingly, the scientists can conclude that the trepanation made by the surgeon in Siberia is in strict accordance with the recommendation of the Hippocratic corpus, which is usually held to have been set down some 5,000 kilometers away, at around the same period in ancient Greece, says Russian academics. They point out in the middle 19th century, survival of patients after trepanation in the best hospital of Europe rarely exceeds 10%, which was associated with an extremely high risk of infection complication. And this operation was committed only when patient had very severe traumatic brain injury. This surgeon of Siberia performed brain surgery based on ancient techniques that had, according to them, a 10% survival rate in the 19th century. This is not to say that no one ever died during brain surgery during the ancient times. We are saying the ancient men did things that they did not have the technology to perform. That's based on our reasoning. Where did they get this ability from without computer or body scanners like the CT scan and those other scans, that CAT scans that people would perform on the brain? How were they able to determine make the hole in this area and not another area is what I'm asking. This shows that the ancient people were smarter than we may think, though they live and dress simply. Transnasal excerebration surgery in ancient Egypt. The authors examine paleoradiological and other evidence from ancient Egyptian skulls and mummies of all periods, from the Old Kingdom to Greco-Roman Egypt, to shed light on the development of transnasal surgery in this ancient civilization. Ancient Egyptians were pioneers in many fields, including medicine and surgery. Our modern knowledge of anatomy, pathology, and surgical techniques stem from discovery and observation made by ancient physicians and embalmers. In the realm of neurosurgery, ancient Egyptians were the first to elucidate cerebral and cranial anatomy, the first to describe evidence for the role of the spinal cord in the transmission of information from the brain to the extremities, and first to invent surgical techniques such as trepanning and stitching. And this is basically what we just talked about a bit earlier. So based on what we're reading, the Egyptians come up with this technique, the Greeks imitated, and now the Serbians have picked up where the Greeks have left off. In addition, the transnasal approach to skull-base and intracranial structures was first devised by ancient embalmers to exhiberate the cranial vault during mummification. In this historical vignette, the authors examine paleoradiological and other evidence from ancient Egyptian skulls and mummies of all periods, from the Old Kingdom to Greco-Roman Egypt, to shed light on the development of transnasal surgery in this ancient civilization. The authors confirm earlier observation concerning the literality of this technique, suggesting that ancient Egyptian excerebration techniques penetrated the skull base mostly on the left side. They also suggest that the original technique used to access the skull base in ancient Egypt was a transethmodal one, which later evolved to follow a transphenodal route similar to the one used today to gain access to pituitary lesions. What are we looking at? I'll show you a modern depiction of this, or I can't say a 3D, but an actual image of what we're looking at. Now, what does this look like to you? Now, ancient origin will talk about what we've just seen. In this article dated 21st of May 2020 by Alicia, she calls it the Dendrolites, Myths, Tests, and Truth. So the Dendrolites is particularly controversial topic since it is not exactly an artifact of potential ancient technology, but possible depiction of such an artifact on a wall of one of the best preserved ancient temples in Egypt, the temple of the ancient goddess Hathor at Dendera. A Norwegian electrical engineer was the first to propose that this image depicted an electrical lamp. Austrian author Peter Krasser and Rainer Habach brought the hypothesis to worldwide attention when they published a book based on the Dendera relief titled Das Licht der Pharaonen. I'm not going to continue to pronounce that. That's not English language. But anyway, what it means is light of the pharaohs, high technology and electricity in ancient Egypt. Another electrical engineer later tested the hypothesis and constructed a working model of the Dendera light in an English translation of an excerpt from the book. Garn is quoted as saying, "If we evacuate a glass bulb with two metal parts reaching into it, B and C, we can see a discharge at much lower level depending on the size of the glass balloon, D. At a pressure of about 40 tons or 40 millimeters of mercury, a snake-like light filament meanders from one metal part to the other, E. If we evacuate further, the light filament grows wider until it fills the whole glass balloon. This is exactly what we see in one of the pictures in the subterranean chambers of the Hathor sanctuary." Now, I didn't put a picture of what he was talking about because the picture was so small, you wouldn't be able to see the letters. You will see the letters, but you won't be able to see the bulb clearly. But anyway, some scientists do not believe the Egyptians of that era had light bulbs, that even though this hieroglyph appears to resemble a bulb, they claim it was not a bulb. And one of the reasons why they claim it wasn't a bulb, because the issue they had was, where did the people get electricity from in order to power those light bulbs? But a study on the Giza pyramids, a history of wireless electricity transmission validated by today's science, Tamer Youssef, advisor, Professor Khalid, Department of Computer Science and Engineering, University of Bridgeport, Connecticut, wrote, "This paper conducts a review to a recent theory that was introduced by Christopher Dunn in 1998 and 2010. This theory suggests that the ancient Egyptians had the technology to generate and wirelessly transmit electricity using the Great Pyramid of Giza. Also, the paper makes a comparison between the principle of this old technology to what is being developed in the present time to achieve wireless and efficient transmission of electric energy. This theory suggests that the sophisticated structure and the design of the pyramid is indicative of a functional purpose more than spiritual. Measurement and scientific studies have been conducted to further prove that those pyramids were built to function as electrical generators and wirelessly transmit this electric energy across Egypt. The authors of this paper are actively conducting a research in the field of wireless electricity transmission. Recent research advancement have been achieved by an MIT or Massachusetts Institute of Technology team back in 2007, sorry. The result of these latest efforts has showed that it is possible to transmit up to 60 watts over a distance of about 2 meters using resonant magnetic coupling between two coils. This technology is named commercially as witricity. This paper presents an overview of this interesting theory as presented in the book of Christopher Dunn, The Giza Power Plant, Technology of Ancient Egypt in 1998, and Lost Technology of Ancient Egypt Advanced Engineering in the Temple of the Pharaohs. In 2010, additionally, the paper illustrates that similarities between the latest trend in the field of wireless electricity transmission and the suggested theory from the perspective of concept of operation. Conclusion: the dream of wirelessly transmitting the electric energy is not new to the humanity. So my argument is, or the whole purpose behind all that we've read is, number one, if these people were performing brain surgery that were successful, and in 1940s, when the same people performed the same type of brain surgery, you had only a 10% success rate. If they were able to make pyramids, what we are now discovering was used to make electricity, then the people of ancient Egypt, this would have been the people after the flood, if they were that intelligent, you could only imagine what the people before the flood know. Now you may ask, well, where did they get this information from? Well, Adam, Shem, Ham, and Noah, all of these people lived before the flood. And from what we can tell, according to the scriptures, Noah was somewhere around 500 to 600 years old, around the time that the flood came. So he would have had 500 or 600 years of learning about the technologies before the flood. And I believe that he would have told his children would have told their children, upwards until you get the time about Abraham and also about Joseph. And during those times when Egypt would have advanced in technology. But that is all for now. This is my reasoning as to why I believe that the people in Noah's day had the capacity to, manipulate genes, because the people in ancient Egyptian times had the ability to wirelessly transmit electricity. And it's only, I'll say, within the past 20 or 30 years that we're now learning how to make wireless charger for our cell phones, when the Egyptians have been doing it for, I'll say, about 4,000, 3,000 years ago. So I hope you enjoyed what we've discovered. I know that there were some tongue-tying words that were discussed, and I may not have presented them or translated them or said them correctly. Please forgive me. I'm not good in English, but I can count well. So again, I hope you enjoyed the study, and come back for the next part, which will be later in the future if it be the will of the Lord.